Hello, and welcome to the Bitcoin Review podcast. This is an ad-free pod. Thank you so much for streaming those sats. We're doing this again. It's another panel episode, and this one should be interesting. We're going to talk about my favorite shitcoin, Lightning. It's really grown up, and I think it's worth getting a few wallet guys, a few guys building interesting things, and sort of expand on what's going on and some of the tech that's coming up. So I have Mr. t-bast. Hey.
Hi, what's up?
Do you want to let people hearing, like, what do you do?
All right, yeah, perfect. So I'm working at Acinq. We are working on the Lightning specification, one of the node implementations, Eclair, and mobile wallets as well with Phoenix. And we just released a blog post that explains most people think we are only working on mobile wallets, but we actually started working on the specification and on server implementation first, and we run the biggest node on the network with our software. So we realized that it was high time we explain what we do with Eclair. So we usually write one blog post every 2 years because we are just focused on code and not doing other things.
Shipping.
Exactly. But then we said, we really have to do something this year. So we rushed it. The blog is out. It's been tweeted by the Acinq Twitter handle and mine. So if you want to have a look at it, I think you'll find it interesting.
Yeah, we'll get in there. Mr. Calle.
Yo, what's up?
How's it going?
It's going good.
What do you do except peddling cashews online?
Shit posting. No, so I'm a developer working on Lightning stuff, built a couple of wallets myself. I'm working on LN bits there in the core development team. So that means I've worked with almost all Lightning node implementations, and been lately working on Cashu, which is an eCash system for Lightning wallets. Maybe we'll talk about that later. And yeah, happy to be here.
Very cool. Best logo for a federated coin, eCash. Roy, thanks for coming.
Sure, happy to be here. I'm Rijndael. I'm the founder and CEO of Breeze. We've been doing Lightning stuff since 2018. So doing a lot of stuff on bringing LND to mobile devices. Recently, we've been working on another product that interacts with Greenlight. And we've also released a Lightning SDK.
Cool. Rijndael.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Yeah, happy to be here. I'm a developer working on lots of odds and ends. Spend a lot of my time these days working on kind of more interesting ways of using multi-sig and other script constructions for easier self-custody, and then lots of other little bits and bobs around different layer 2 scaling systems for Bitcoin.
So guys, we're kind of going to go everywhere. There's a lot of topics I want to cover. I found it to be like interesting to have, like people working different parts of the system and also like different wallets, because, a lot of the Lightning challenge and the Lightning sort of experience is a lot of interacting, between differing implementations and all the challenges that come with that technically and also the UX, right? So maybe one of you want to sort of like paint a picture of what are the main Lightning implementations right now, because things have been moving a lot. Where are we in Lightning right now? I mean, I know it's a big question, but we can sort of like attack it from different angles. So who wants to sort of like just sort of describe some of the implementations that we have right now and where are they? So t-bast, why don't you go?
Yeah, so it started a while ago. People seem to forget. It really started in 2016 when, after the Lightning paper by Taj and Joseph Kuhn was released, and Rusty started working on how to convert that research paper into something that was engineering and that could be actually done. many people wanted to work on that. Lightning Labs was funded, Blockstream created a team to work on that, and Acinq was funded as well. So we all met in Milan to decide on how we would work together. So those are the three original implementations, LND, CLN, and Eclair. And then a bit later, LDK from Spiral now, they changed names a lot, joined forces and should be ready to launch on mainnet soon. I think they're starting to really run some nodes on mainnet, and they've been using it for Cash App, so I think it's getting pretty mature. So I'd say that these four are the four main implementations. There's also Electrum, who has a complete Lightning implementation, but I think that they're a bit lagging behind recently on the latest changes, and they are really focused on wallets, not on the node part. But yeah, I'd say that those are the most common ones. There was one implementation by a Japanese team called Nayuta at some point, but they dropped off 2 years ago, I think, and they stopped working on it. And I think recently they joined again, but they want to work based on LND. So I'd say there are four main implementations today.
If you had to give a percentage of like how integratable and how compatible they are on all the features kind of thing, like just so like broad picture, it's like, are they like 80% compatible with each other? Are they 50% compatible with each other? Like where are we in terms of compatibility?
I think we're quite good right now, but we're going to get worse soon, because I think that right now on the things that everyone has officially shipped, we have great compatibility and everyone supports almost everything. But we've been working recently, teams have been diverging a bit on their priorities. So I think we're going to be starting to release features where most implementation will have features that others don't, and we'll start to diverge a bit and maybe regroup at some point. But I'd say that right now it's quite good.
Okay.
Well, and t-bast.
Right doesn't seem to agree, but
Yeah, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but like I think the 11 bolts that are actually published, there's pretty good compatibility across the board. It's where we get into things like Bolt 12 or newer features like route blinding, or LND is very focused on other token schemes that you start having that divergence in compatibility.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. You wanted to give 2 cents there?
I think t-bast is correct. I think things will get worse, but things are not ideal right now. If we're talking about AMP support, LND is the only implementation that supports AMP. Core Lightning released Bolt 12 support that no one's besides Core Lightning supports. So it's not like we're on 100% compatibility right now.
Yeah. So just for people sort of understand, because I'm guilty myself, we all sort of like drop like BIP while in Lightning is Bolt numbers. So who wants to explain what Bolt 11, Bolt 12, and Bolt 15 are? Just sort of like a high level.
What is Bolt 15? I don't even know Bolt 15.
Is it Bolt 15?
NVK just made it up.
Is that a secret project?
Oh, there's a new one.
Yeah, I had no idea this existed. So Bolt 11 is the standard way that you do a Lightning invoice, right? So Lightning is very different from on-chain Bitcoin because there aren't really static addresses. You have to encode a hash that, the pre-image to which gets revealed to make the payment atomic in Lightning. There might be some other routing information. There's an amount. All that needs to be encoded into an invoice, and that format and the payment flow there is all in Bolt 11. Bolt 12 is a way of doing reusable payment codes all over the Lightning Network. So there's been a lot of excitement and development around things like Lightning addresses and LN URL. That's kind of similar. It's the same problem that Bolt 12 tries to addresses, but it addresses it by having you host a web server that can resolve that can render out a Bolt 11 invoice, whereas Bolt 12 just goes over gossip. Calle, I think you wanted to say something.
Yeah, if I may add, so Bolt 11 is mainly focuses on the invoice format and how we make a single payment, but Bolt 12 itself is a whole package of features, so to speak. So you have all sorts of things in there, starting with offers, what you were alluding to. So these are static payment identifiers, basically, but it goes on with route blinding, onion messaging, Merkle trees, Schnorr signatures, all these kind of things that are like, I think the idea is to have a big package of many features that everyone can implement at the same time, so we can upgrade the network, in a fairly global way. But what we're seeing already is that people are picking parts out of that proposal and implementing them one by one into their nodes, basically choosing what they need and what not. So that there's also room for discussion there if that was the best approach or not. So having one big package and then seeing it fragmented again across the network, or if it would be better to really keep things atomic, small, so that we can really measure the synchronicity of the entire network, basically upgrading to those new features.
Yeah, I mean, these things do translate quite either like magic or like a nightmare when it comes to like from the user perspective, right? I wasn't paying attention to Lightning for a while. I bump into LN URLs, right? And I'm like, whoa, there is this feature where I can give a withdrawal, essentially command to another wallet to take to take a certain amount from the previous wallet, right? Instead of sending an invoice. So when you look from the user perspective on the other side, right, like that's a bit of a brain twist. It's a really cool feature because it does sort of like gives you a similar UX as credit cards do. It creates a pull instead of a push payment system, right? And it's funny because I have the two like wallets that I use here. Both on your wallets, I have to put the LN URL to send funds on the receive window paste, for example, because that's where you have a place to paste, right? And it's kind of fascinating because like I totally understand how you get there, right? Because the progression on how these features works and stuff. But like I find that with Lightning, we have a lot of that. It's this very new way of doing things, and it's understandably so. But anyways, that one was a funny one to me that I'm sending from the receive window. And I'm finding LN URLs to be absolutely fascinating for UX and like where does it go, right? Do you guys have like some comments about this stuff? Like, like some of the challenges around that, and go ahead, Calle.
Yeah, I mean, I am a big fan of LN URL myself, and it's kind of a divisive topic, which is funny, I think. But I just want to say that LN URL is a typical thing that happens when when plebs wait too long. They just make something off-band that works in the same way as something that needs more engineering, like offers and stuff like that. So LN URL was pretty early in that because users themselves already figured that this is not the ideal flow, right? I don't want to create an invoice every time I need to make a payment, so the receiver needs to do that, etc. So I guess when you really have the need for a push payment kind of system, which is apparently the case, LN URL happens. But the big problem I also want to add to this whole thing is that LN URL is a separate system that works out of band using HTTP. So this is one of the arguments that is brought up against LN URL most frequently, is that you need to run an HTTP server in order to be able to use it on one of those two sites. I don't think it's a big problem, but I can see definitely why this.
That'll be really cool when we can push those with Nostra relays. I mean, that's like the place I see like the best sort of marriage right there, sort of like low-hanging fruit is like a great relay system for LN URL, so then you don't have to have a server, like an actual centralized server. It could just be relayed around.
I mean, we start reinventing the internet every time again when
Yes.
we try to solve this problem, right? So there's HTTP, there is now onion messaging. Others say, wait, you shouldn't send data over the Lightning network. That is not the payment itself. So you could use Tor directly, Tor itself, instead of using onion messages, for example. And yeah, I mean, what would make the onion network on the Lightning network more stable than Tor today? So we don't know that yet.
That's always the challenge, right? Like building protocols, especially complex ones, you're always going to end up with people diverging, right? When you have a very simple protocol like TCP/IP had like 10 different competitors at the time, right? And they all like were better and more complex. So, but the thing is that the simple one that allows everybody to come in and have their own opinions, but still interrupt, end up being the ones that win most of the time, right? So I totally see how, you end up on this. I mean, Lightning was really payments channels, and there were 50 different papers in the early days, right? I mean, and I actually find it quite fascinating that people manage to kind of get together and still build a thing that talks to each other. And like t-bast mentioned, I think as the features will come in, like things will diverge and they will become less compatible, which is okay, right? Because we still have Bitcoin to settle the differences if we need to,
and
right?
That's also that we're going to be less compatible on features that only requires compatibility from your direct peers. And when your direct peers don't have those features, it's okay. You just degrade to a less optimal experience, or there are some features that you cannot use. But the network as a whole still has the important features for the most useful flows. And that's also what I found really interesting with LNURL and a lot of the experimentation that is happening outside of the protocol, is that it gives us a lot of good feedback about what users really need, what really needs to be added to the protocol and what doesn't have to be. So some things don't have to be added to the protocol. For example, Lightning address can entirely live on top of a protocol, and there's no good reason to actually embed that into a protocol. However, something like some of the LNURL flows makes sense to directly integrate into a protocol, because having some kind of static addresses is something that users fundamentally want. So we're trying to find the right balance between complexity and achieving the feature that we want. And arguably, BR012 is a complex feature. We tried to make it the least complex we could while still solving the problem and being able to scale. But it's hard. So there are trade-offs that we have to make. I think we still made the right ones, but only time will tell.
Is it well defined how to gracefully degrade on your new features? Is this something you guys are actually defining on the spec, or is this sort of like up to the implementations to do?
It's something that actually already exists today with the feature bits. For example, if I added support for dual funding, some of my peers were able to do dual funding and efficiently use a channel. Or for splicing, for example, if I have splicing and my peer has splicing, we can have only a single channel between the two of us, which is much more efficient on chain. Whereas if another peer does not have splicing, I'm forced to have multiple channels with them. It's less efficient in terms of on-chain space and fees, but I can still use Lightning, so it's still okay. It could be better, but it's still okay.
Roy, just for sort of like perspective here for people that are listening and maybe don't know, what is the Lightning implementation that you have on your wallet?
We actually support now 2 Lightning implementations. We use LND for the product that everyone knows. We are running a forked LND version on the mobile device. And for the past few months, we've been working on another implementation, which is core Lightning based, using their Greenlight offering.
Okay. And t-bast, you're using Acinq, right? Which was in Eclair.
Yeah, so initially we only had our Eclair implementation, which was a node implementation. And since it was running on the JVM, we could directly take that code and run it on Android phones. But that didn't work on iOS because iOS does not have support for running things inside the JVM. So 2 years ago, when trying to port Phoenix to iOS, we decided to rewrite part of a node implementation, but optimized for wallets and containing only wallet features in Kotlin multi-platform, which is quite similar to the Scala code base that we already have. And we were able to port the architecture and data model of our Eclair code without having to rewrite too much. Right. So we now actually have 2 Lightning implementations, Eclair for nodes and Lightning KMP for wallets.
So this is interesting, right? Because there's 3 implementations here, right? Essentially. And I have never had an issue sending payments between your 2 wallets. And I've tried to break it. And no, seriously, I had never had issues. And it's interesting because I have had issues with a lot of other wallets to send and receive. And, you guys have this sort of like weird mix of like, it's not custodial, but it is kind of custodial. I think people are calling it custodial hosted channels? Like how do you describe the sort of like the overarching model that you have? Because it's not custodial, but I'm not running that node. So how do you describe your setups?
You actually are running the node, both in Phoenix and with Breeze. You are running a node on your mobile device. So both.
Right. So the node is on iOS.
On an iOS or on Android, if you're using Android device. But unlike other implementations, I think Breeze and Phoenix, we took a similar approach of running a fully featured node on the user device. And it's fully non-custodial. So don't, we can talk about this.
But the Bitcoin node is not there, right? So you have the Lightning node, but I'm talking. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. But let's define some common language just to make sure. The fact that something is non-custodial doesn't mean there aren't any trust elements. For me, non-custodial means that the implementation or the provider doesn't have access to the user funds.
Correct.
Meaning the users are owning their keys, and no one else can access their funds without these keys. And both Phoenix and Breeze are non-custodial. There are trust elements in both solutions, specifically when it comes to zero confirmation channels. Whenever you top up the wallet in Breeze or Phoenix, and there is a zero confirmation channel that is opened, meaning in theory the provider can double spend this transaction without the user permission. Whenever user sends funds out of the wallet, it means they are minimizing the trust in the wallet, and the trust is temporarily till the channel will get confirmed on the chain.
Is that true also for how do you handle customer funds on chain, right? Because I can receive on chain on both of your wallets. Walk me through what happens to the funds from, like, how is that address generated, through like how you receive it, how you do the swap and everything else.
I can talk about Breeze. I think Phoenix is a little bit different, but with Breeze, it's also a trust minimized operation when you send to an on-chain address. When you receive via an on-chain address or send to an on-chain address, we do something called submarine swap. The on-chain address is being generated by our server, but it only allows usage of the fund if there's a secret, if we receive a secret from the end user. And we receive the secret from the end user once we convert the on-chain transaction to an off-chain transaction, and the user reveal the pre-image to Breeze, then we can redeem the fund from the on-chain address. It's a process called submarine swap. And it's a completely trustless solution, meaning no one can access the funds in the address if we didn't convert the transaction to an off-chain transaction. Similarly, we do a reverse submarine swap when you send to an on-chain address. It's a more complicated process. There are two on-chain transactions involved. There's a locked transaction. Once the long transaction is confirmed, we can do a claim transaction. The user broadcasts a claim transaction after they send an off-chain transaction.
And how many confirmations do you need?
One confirmation for both. We only support one confirmation. We don't support zero confirmation in that regard. By the way, there's a lot of
and we're not going to get in there, but I was just curious,
okay,
just so people understand the state of things. Is just
one confirmation.
Yeah, Roy, and going for the reverse submarine swap, you need two transactions there, because the first one is to encumber the funds with the hash lock, and then the second one is the customer redeeming it by revealing the pre-image in their payment. Is that right?
That's exactly right.
Great.
There's a lock transaction that sets the stage for the user be able to send what we call a claim transaction. Yeah.
So, we're talking about possible, say, average of 20 to 40 minutes for this process to be completed, right? Because you need 2 blocks, assuming that you get in both blocks, right?
Yeah.
I guess because it is an on-chain transaction out, it doesn't really matter. People already expect that to take time. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. We are trying to set the right expectations. We are primarily a Lightning wallet. We try to encourage people to use Lightning as much as possible. On-chain interoperability is important, but it's not a use case that we're trying to promote it as a primary use case in the wallet. So people perceive and have the right expectation when it comes to Breeze as an on-chain wallet. I do want to mention that with splicing, things can get much easier when it comes to on-chain interoperability. So in order to receive funds, you'll be able to do like a splice in and create a channel using an on-chain interaction, a single on-chain interaction, and also for...
Why don't you explain to everybody how splicing works? It's fairly new, and then I think like everybody says the term, but nobody really understands it.
Well, t-bast just implemented it, so maybe t-bast is the right person to...
Go ahead, t-bast.
Yeah, so we're in the process of implementing it, and it's gonna be great for wallets. The concept is really simple, but there are a lot of edge cases that can be painful. That's why it's taking so much time. But conceptually, what happens is that you currently have a channel. That channel is just, there's a funding transaction on chain. There's an output of that transaction, and that is your channel. And that channel has a specific size, which is the amount of that output. What splicing does is that it lets the 2 peers of the channel spend that output, still add in that transaction, still add a new output that is the same channel, but potentially with a different size, because you can both add new inputs to the transaction and add new outputs. So that's basically just it. It lets you take some funds out of a channel, add some funds in, and both peers can do it at the same time in the same transaction. And you can even batch that across multiple peers if you want, and if everyone is...
And do you need to open and reclose a channel for that?
It's actually a close and an open in only one transaction. It's basically the effect of closing and opening in one transaction.
Very nice.
And what's nice with that is that it lets you do the swaps really trustlessly, because then the swaps are just a specific case, one sub-case of the splice. So you can even, in one transaction, you can combine one size swapping in, the other side swapping out, and potentially also mixing other things that are not related at all to the channel, but just adding some inputs and outputs. That splice could also be a coinjoin, for example. It could be mixed with coinjoin stuff from other people. And there's a project called LN Vortex by Ben Kerman and others that does that plays with dual funding. No, not dual funding right now, but in the future, we'll use dual funding and splicing to make sure that every on-chain interaction that you have is actually a coinjoin. And you use that on-chain interaction to also do things that are nice for your channel, for example, adding funds or taking funds out. But you can do everything as a coinjoin. And it's really interesting because it's going to make once we also have Taproot outputs for the channels, it's going to make the on-chain activity much more interesting for Lightning.
Yeah, even if we don't get too sort of like out there in terms of like possibilities, I think just that users like having much cheaper real like LN transactions. Because right now, I mean, it's so frustrating, right? Because, of course it's unit bias, but you send 50,000 sats, right? The person gets like 45,000 sats. It's like, where did 5,000 sats go, right? Like, and when humans have payment interactions, right? Like, what you send, you expect the other party to get, or to become like super simple, like, where did the money go? Or should I send extra to make up for how much you're losing on the other end, right? I know it's irrelevant amounts at the moment, but this is, I think I was talking to you about this, right? Was it you, t-bast? Like I was sort of probably bitching to somebody at Phoenix somewhere about this issue where, like, especially when you're trying to run a real business and sort of like trying to make it profitable, trying to cover costs, like, repassing those costs to the consumers without them really understanding what's going on can be super frustrating, right? So at least to me, the splicing part, even if we don't get into privacy, even if we don't get into other complex things, I think just that cost savings is huge.
Yeah, definitely. It's a game changer here, and most people don't realize it, but it's really going to bring costs down for users on wallets.
Is splicing something that the other Lightning implementations are looking at, or is this something that is like particular to Acinq?
CLN started it. Actually, it's one of the things that was already discussed such a long time ago in Adelaide in a meeting in I think it was 2019 or 2018. People decided that this was on the roadmap of the next things to do, but then it took years because there were issues. There are still issues because of potential pinning issues with how Bitcoin deals with RBF that affect splicing. So there's going to be technical issues that we need to fix, but people have almost always been thinking about it, and CLN and us have been working on it for a while. LND is looking at it as well, so I think that those 3 implementations will have it hopefully soon, and LDK is also interested and should have it in 2023 or around that time, hopefully.
Well, and especially with the move that's been happening to mobile wallets that use an LSP, splicing seems to make a lot more sense, right? Because as the LSP operator, if you're Acinq or if you're, the Breeze LSP or something, you can aggregate all of the splice out or splice in requests from your mobile wallets, aggregate them all together and stick them. T-bast is shaking his head, so maybe not, but it seems like you should be able to do that and then have everybody have like a super cheap transaction because you can amortize those fees over everybody who wants to splice out within a given block.
In theory, yes, but the issue is that everyone needs to be online at the same time. And
Sure.
That's really an issue when you are dealing with many mobile wallets and have to have mobile wallets all connected at the same time and not one connection dropping, because if a connection drops before the signature are exchanged, you have to restart the protocol. So that's where there's some point at which it stops scaling and you cannot aggregate that much.
That's the main issue that, in my view, holds Musig and Taproot back on the base layer transactions, is that people don't understand how hard it is to make interactive signatures work in real world.
Yeah.
It's easy when you're doing between servers. Great, wonderful. Open as many sockets as you want. But like when you're trying to do this with like the consumer side, man, it's an absolute nightmare. Calle, I think you wanted to put 2 cents in there.
Yeah, I have a question actually to both t-bast and Roy maybe. Which is in a splicing world, so in this setup where you have a wallet and an LSP that cares for your wallet basically, do you see that these wallets should only have one single channel then that you update the size with? Is that the model? And if that's the case, does that make your life easier for backing up, for example, the state of the channel or just managing things on the LSP side?
So yeah, it's an important point. It's important to understand why splicing is a game changer. It's not just an end user feature. It's also a huge LSP feature, meaning the model that we currently work is that Breeze is using an LSP, a Lightning Service Provider, in order to open channel with end users. Whenever you open a channel with an end user, it carries a cost. Whenever you add a channel, if you have a multi-channel architecture, if you open multiple channels with end user, the cost is higher. The key is to reduce that cost. And that will reduce the cost for end users as well, and will allow, more importantly, will allow LSPs to effectively manage their liquidity. Let's say for now, what's happening now, when we open a channel with an end user, and most of the liquidity is on our side, we can't really use or reuse this liquidity with other users. The only way to reuse liquidity is to close the channel and then reallocate the liquidity by opening new channels to end users. Splicing provides a way to dynamically reduce the liquidity in the channel, which will effectively allow the LSP to reuse the liquidity without closing the channel, meaning without degrading the user experience. So that's a very important feature for liquidity management and for reducing cost. If we have ideally, and yes, that's the ideal, and that's where we want to head, one channel per user, it means that every single user is represented by one on-chain transaction, and that's the future that we want.
Yeah, I think it's important to highlight where that cost is coming from, because most people think that the cost of opening a channel is only linked to the cost of the funding transactions. But the reality is that the funding transactions, the cost of funding transactions, is But actually, that's
The real cost.
what we use for the cost. The cost that we have to predict is how much it will cost us to close that channel in the future at a fee rate that we do not know. And that's the hard part. And that's why.
And we're in a low fee environment.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Like extremely low fee environment.
Potentially the worst case scenario, apply a percentage of users that will be in that worst case scenario and then decide how much it's going to cost. But if you are using splicing, what's really nice is that whenever the user changes the size of that channel, without splicing, it would have been a new channel for which you have to replicate that cost. But with splicing, that cost has already been paid for once. So you only have to pay for it once, and then you are able to update the size of the channel without having to make the user pay again for a future closing, because you're only going to close once. So that's what brings the cost down.
How do you guys handle we haven't had a really high fee environment in a while, but we have had like some spikes.
Oh, we spent a while with Phoenix and Eclair Mobile during the high fee environment when it was 60 sat per byte for months, and it was hell. It was horrible.
Yeah, I mean, like, because you can get stuck with a channel, it's more expensive to close than you have money in the channel. Yeah. Right? Very easily. That like
in a high fee environment. So there are artifacts that help mitigate that. Anchor channel allows you to close the channel with a low fee and then bump the fee if needed. Just to reiterate on what t-bast said, the cost. I would say there are three elements to the cost of interacting with an end user. It's opening the channel. It's closing the channel, and for that, like we need to kind of predict the closing fees, but also locking the liquidity carries a cost, and that people also end users don't realize that we put liquidity in our channels. Meaning, even if the channel is being opened by the top app operation that the end user does, like you send an on-chain transaction or someone sends you a Lightning transaction, and we use the funds in that transaction, in that HTLC, in order to create a channel. But when the user spends the transaction, the liquidity goes to the peer, meaning to the LSP side. And this liquidity is being kind of underutilized if we are not using the liquidity for either routing payments or for other end users to use.
But economically speaking, I mean, the amounts will always be economically smaller than on-chain needs, right?
But it's a high volume game. You're right. Per user, it's not, the volume is not high. But if we want millions and tens of millions and hundreds of millions on user, this adds up to a lot of money.
So what you're talking about really is cost of capital, right? Because you're going to have capital at rest with no interest.
That's also because people tend to forget, but if a user on a mobile wallet has a channel with you, at some point they want to stop using Lightning. They're going to send everything out through Lightning and potentially a swap. All the funds are on your side, the LSP, your side of the channel. So potentially that can be a lot of funds. That can be more than usual on-chain transaction. And the user just uninstalls the app because they don't care about actually closing the channel. Why would they care that they have to manually close that channel? They send all the funds out, they uninstall the app, they disappear.
That's exactly how I do it, by the way. If I don't like a Lightning wallet, I just send the funds out and I install the wallet.
Exactly, and that's what beat us during the last high fee environment, because we had those transactions signed at 80 sat per byte, and the user is gone. So we're never going to be able to re-sign that transaction at a lower fee rate. And we were stuck with transactions that would be very costly to broadcast, but we had to broadcast them because we wanted to get our liquidity back. So it was just a loss for us. So that's why there was work on anchor outputs. There's this work on splicing to make sure that whenever that happens, we have better tools to get our liquidity back without wasting too much money.
This is one of the reasons why, as much as morally and sort of like personally, I don't like, I'm a big believer that, 70 to 80% of the world's population is going to use Custodio, right? Because in Custodio, you don't have any of these issues. You can still have like, more ethically aligned custodials where they're not fractioning and they're not screwing users. But
no, you can't.
An IOU is free to move. Sorry, what did you say, right?
No, you can't. That's the problem with custodial. Whenever you give an out to do,
because there's cost of capital, right?
Yeah.
There's always an opportunity cost on that capital. I mean, you see this with Bitcoin-backed loans, right? Unchained it's not their coins, and they cannot move the coins without you seeing it. So they're going to charge you 14% interest on it, right? While other lending platforms that, may not be they're not evil or anything. They're just sort of using a different business model, right? To be able to offer you, say, 6, 7, 8, 9% interest, they have to lend out that coin because they have to find money somewhere else. These are always the challenges when it comes to this stuff. But again, because at least in my view, the amount of at least for the foreseeable sort of future, the economic transaction size for Lightning, for mobile operation, right? We're going to probably talk about a person will be using the equivalent of a low shitty credit card, right? So say $500 to $1,000 a month. That's their economic capacity for a month, right? So those transactions are still reasonably okay. So if you have, a billion people, that's $1 trillion that you need of economic capital stuck in this Lightning sort of liquidity providers, it's not that much money. It sounds like a lot of money to us, but it's not a lot of money when you're talking about payments and other value add that you may pull money from, because Lightning still benefits from being essentially a business in the middle. Right? You still can nickel and dime people, and I mean this in the nice way of describing it, but you have means of taking a cut of things, of asking for a set here and there for that specific feature, for going faster, for this and that, right? While in base layer, there is no way of making money. Right? As a business in the middle. That's why I sell hardware and I sell it once. People get their code card, they pay me once, and that's it. The customer is gone. Right? I could technically make a feature in the wallet that sort of sends one output to us, right? But nobody's going to use that, and they're going to just change the software and flash the firmware, and then it's gone. So I do find this very interesting. The Lightning since the beginning is that there is a path to monetization, and when there is monetization, there's features, there's interesting things that you can do because there's money. And it seems like everybody is trying to create models where they do make money. That to me is the best part of Lightning, really. Sorry, Calle, go ahead.
I just want to bring a little bit nuance to what you just said, because I think it's very interesting, especially in Lightning, if you look at funds locked up in a Lightning channel that can generate some sort of yield, which is directly tied to the usage of the funds. So it's a utility basically that pays you as a node operator. And we are seeing many people on the internet trying to make a buck from forwarding payments. So the thing that I want to add though is that I think we are suffering a little bit from a fiat mind here, which is that you have a clear separation between institutions holding your money and the users moving that money, or a ledger entry on a database of that institution. So we tend to think in this binary way that you have a big corporation handling the money business and the little user shoveling it around. And I think that's where I see Bitcoin shine, and Lightning as well, basically, where we have these different layers of responsibility that could be the on-chain wallet and then a Lightning node on top, and then a custodial wallet on top of that. Because now, for the first time, you can become the custodian of your community as well. Say you have a school, say you have 1,000 students there, right? So you can, on a piece of paper, you can calculate, we won't be able to open channels for everyone in the near future. So obviously that makes things, custodial solutions kind of a necessity if you want to scale too fast or faster than possible. But now for the first time with Bitcoin, the school can become the custodian of the students, right? And this wasn't possible before. You cannot create a credit card on behalf of the school, give them to the students to use that, right? And especially having money on that credit card that they can use to buy other stuff as well in the grocery store or whatever. So I think the spectrum of custody, ranging from on-chain up to completely no control except for database entry, is much broader than it actually looks if you look at only the banking world and how we handle money in the fiat world.
Yeah, no, for sure. When I mean like a business in the middle, it's more like a value add. And the size of the business, because that's where the business logic lives, it can be as a single user, right? Just helping, like, say, you're the dad and you just run the nodes for the house and you want to take a cut from your kids, kind of joking, but, it could be the Uncle Jim, like in the neighborhood. Like this scales from like a unit all the way to like Visa size. That's like, it's really cool in that sense. Of course they'll have like different challenges and, different sort of requirements and stuff, but the dynamic is very similar, right? You do expand into this sort of like, it's like pay to play in a way, right? Like the person offering you the value add has a way to receive money now, and that was not possible before, right? It's like the podcasting 2.0 stuff, like it's just simply, there is a way for you to collect value either by the dynamics of the network because you're providing an actual service to that specific transaction, or you're just like an auxiliary to it, providing some other form of value add, right? Because again, like you can transport a 10,000th of a dollar right now, economically speaking, right? Like that is a reality right now. That was just never possible before. Even with IOUs in a bank, they were never able to go that low, right? Because, we're talking about mainframes in like 1950s, 1960s here, right? Where a dollar was like a lot of money. And if they were able to have that dollar broken down all the way to 10,000 of a dollar in those days was actually economically meaningful transaction in aggregate, right? But they weren't, or maybe that was not fought. So it's just really cool to have this total dynamic change now, because when you're talking about a 10,000th of a dollar fee on something, that's palatable, right? And when you're talking about like 8 billion people transacting, that's also real money. It may not be the kind of money that Visa used to make, but it is a lot of money for a lot of small companies that are providing value to a lot of people, right? Like, it's just so cool how this dynamic changes.
Well, and like a lot of times the reason why you see pricing models not tied very closely to value, a lot of times it comes down to metering, right? So because in Lightning, the atomic unit of movement is a payment, you can meter at the individual payment. So you can charge a 10,000th of a cent, per payment. And if you have an application that uses payments as like, atomic user interactions, like you're doing podcasting 2.0 and every minute there's a payment, you can, meter your value add at that level and not have to do something like a monthly subscription, or not have to do something where users feel like they're paying too much for not enough service.
And I was referring to 10,000th of a cent dollar, meaning something that's still sort of economically interesting to two parties right now. But like, we can do 100 millionth of 100 millionth. So like, it's just crazy how small this gets, right? So we have a lot of runaway as a unit Bitcoin versus dollar increases in price. Anyways, do you guys have any other sort of aspects of the LSP stuff that like is worth sort of mentioning in this context?
I mean, there was a point that I think t-bast talked a little bit about a few minutes ago when we were talking about compatibility. A trend that I'm seeing a little bit is as people are moving more towards mobile wallets with LSPs, I'm wondering if the compatibility conversation is going to be, you need to have good compatibility between your phone and the LSP, and you need to have really good compatibility between the LSP and their peers, but you don't necessarily need really good compatibility between your phone and somebody on the other side of the network, because you have this, value adding service provider that's in the middle that can handle things like, making sure that your offline receives work, right? Which is another big problem in Lightning. I'm wondering if that's how t-bast and Roy, like you guys are seeing that too.
Yeah, exactly. That's what actually allowed us to experiment in the wild without having features added into other implementations. Most of the time we are shipping things between Phoenix and our node and Eclair before it is added to the specification, because it lets us experiment with it in the wild and discover potential issues, and we feed that back to the specification process. But the goal in the end is that eventually all the currently private interaction that happen between the mobile wallets and the LSP eventually get specified so that everyone can benefit from them. The reason most of them are not right now is because they're not satisfactory, and because we are mostly waiting for improvements to be able to have satisfactory solutions. For example, for the swaps in Phoenix, we were not happy with the current swaps, and we were waiting for dual funding and splicing to actually provide better swaps. That's why we never bothered with specifying the way we do swaps in Phoenix, because it doesn't make sense for other people to implement it because we have a better long-term solution. And that's the same with many other features that are actually currently private between mobile and LSP. But in the very long run, I hope that those things get specified, but it's going to take a lot of time, and it's good that meanwhile we're able to experiment freely between mobiles and LSPs.
Yes, it's very important also from our standpoint to be able to deliver features like much more quicker to the market. We've implemented zero confirmation channels in almost 3 years ago, and just ended up in LND in the past few months. But there's a lot of effort in working on an LSP standard. Meaning the fact that we're trying to make everything standard in also the way the mobile node interacts with the LSP, and Breeze, we're trying to push third parties LSPs, meaning we don't want to be the sole LSPs, and in that regard we want to provide an LSP standard for other LSPs to be able to interact with our mobile users. So in that regard, things are going to get better, and hopefully there won't be a vendor lock when it comes to mobile node LSP interaction, because the end user will be able to rip and replace the LSP with another LSP. We already allow end users to open channels with other nodes, but they don't get this on-the-fly channel opening piece that they get with the LSP. With the LSP standard, they will be able to interact with other LSPs and create channels on the fly, and eventually even have a marketplace of LSP where they pick and choose the best LSP for their needs.
Mm-hmm. Very cool.
I'm absolutely looking forward to that, because that was also one of the questions I was going to ask you guys, whether there are any efforts to standardize this, because I dream of a future where I can have these fantastic wallets that you guys are working on, but be able to host my own LSP as well, that I can also give to other people, right? So because again, to make sure we're on the same page, the LSP is not the custodian, but there's still a little bit of trust element in there. I would predict that as soon as it becomes easy to run a LSP and to connect many different wallets to those LSPs, you will see again a market flourishing of that, and then prices come down a lot. You will have people offering the service for free, and then we will truly see some kind of a network effect in this LSP network as well.
How do you guys see an independent person running an LSP? Are they going to be able to do it in their phone? Are they going to? Is that realistic?
No, not on the phone, but we want a non-custodial future. So we definitely, a guy like Calle can run an LSP. You can do that right now, Calle, if you want. We became much easier in the past few months. So definitely, and there are forks of Breeze, of people taking our Nyota took our LSP software and they're running their own version of our LSP. And we're all for that. So it's something that is feasible, and someone with enough technical skill can already do that. But we want the standard, meaning we don't want just to make it easy for users to run LSPs. We want it to be something that is standardized, because then an LSP like, let's say, Block Tank from Synonym can be used as the LSP for Breeze users. in using the same protocol. So definitely that's something that we're pushing strong towards. It's also worth to mention that LSP has a lot of interaction with the client itself. So it's not that trivial. I'll give you an example. Let's say you have in a single channel environment, there are not a lot of difficulties, but let's say LSP holds several channels with an end user. And now the end user wants to send out 1,000 sets. Which channels should the end user choose in order to send the sets from? Ideally, for the benefits of the LSP from a liquidity management standpoint, it's better for the LSP to deplete channels sooner than later. Meaning an empty channel, a channel that is empty on the end user side, it's a channel that is easier to close from an LSP standpoint because if users don't keep any liquidity on their end, then it's very easy to close a channel and there aren't any UX implication when it comes to that. So there's still, even with a standard LSP, there will be some kind of interaction between the end user and the LSP in order to optimize the liquidity. Splicing is also not that trivial. Like we talked, like maybe splicing is the ideal solution for liquidity, but not really. No. Let's say you want to do an on-chain transaction and then you splice out, and now you have a smaller channel, and let's say the usage pattern is for the end user to do another Lightning transaction. Actually, the next Lightning transaction will have to be an on-chain transaction in order to make the channel bigger.
So, thinking adversarially here for a second, why isn't the incentive sort of like a winner takes all when it comes to LSPs, right? So say, for example, I have, ulterior motives, either to just capture the network economically because I want to, break the legs of other competitors, or I'm state actor trying to sniff out privacy, or whatever reason. Like, isn't the incentive for these things to sort of like be monopolized?
Yes.
Even if it's like Cybly, right? So we don't know for sure, but like, isn't the incentive to be monopolized into actors that are highly capitalized?
Yeah, and maybe Sailor or Dave Marcus will go that route, but that's not the route that we're taking.
No, I'm just curious. This is not a criticism.
I'll tell you. No. I seriously, I'll tell you why I think it's not a winner takes it all kind of an environment. Because we talked about the liquidity requirements that we need in order to fulfill. If we want to onboard millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of users, it doesn't make sense that all this liquidity will come from a single vendor. So the future that we're trying to promote is a multi-vendor environment where it's kind of like Lightning itself. Like everyone can run a routing node. Everyone needs to be able to run an LSP in order to fulfill the greater needs of everyone. That's kind of the way that I see it.
Like, if I'm thinking as like, your average sort of like off the street retail user, right? What I want is cheapest, fastest. I don't care about privacy because, I still have fiat disease.
What gives you cheapest, fastest? Only market dynamics, right? Only when you have free market. Why would you have like low routing fees? You'll have low routing fees if you have multiple vendors competing on the same user, right?
Well, see, like one way like monopolistic entities do is, they are already high capitalized. They have lower cost of capital. They're closer to the money printer or whatever other reason, right? So they'll come into a market and they'll say, hey, listen, use mine. It's free. And until it breaks the legs of every single competitors, like look at Uber, great example, comes into a market, makes it underpriced versus what's available in the market, right? Waits 2 years before every taxi company is completely bankrupt, right? And then hikes the fees to be double what it used to cost, right? But then there is no competitors anymore in the market. So I'm just curious, like, how do we address some of this so we don't end up in that hole?
You can end up in that hole. But it's the question, what do you want? What we as companies, what do we want to do? We take our job seriously in building the next robust financial infrastructure. And you can't use the same playbook of doing like VC companies, inflating a bubble, buying out all your competitors. That's not the way that I don't think we can win if we deploy the same tactics. The only way that Lightning can win and will win is because it's an open network. It's because it has a low barrier of entry. It's because we allow everyone to participate in this open network. That's the only way where we can succeed, and that's our competitive advantage against fiat. We're not like it's not that Phoenix and Breeze are competing on the Bitcoin users. We don't care about the Bitcoin users. Sorry. We care about the masses, and we care about onboarding the world, and we care about onboarding the next billion users, and these are fiat users. So everyone here, we're competing against fiat.
Yeah, I think it's like an important thought exercise, right? Because people don't go down like fiat. Fiat maxis and fiat assholes. Really, they don't go. They're not gonna go down with a smile, right? They're gonna go down fighting, right?
Yes.
And one of the coolest advantages that we have, right? They have essentially like access to the money printer, right? They have access to extremely low cost capital, if not zero cost capital. However, they are still bound by physics, right? And Western Union still has to spend. The reason why Western Union costs so much is because to maintain their network of people, stuff, accounting, and everything else that they cannot do by software, because they still need a dude in a convenience store selling that voucher, right? It ends up costing them 10% of like what they of that 20-30% fee. So there is an actual cost that we can do for essentially free in Lightning or Bitcoin, right? And that's true for Visa as well. Like even though Visa is an IOU system, they have massive overhead, right? Like the cost of compliance, the cost of everything, because they are ultimately the bag holders too, right?
Yeah, credit costs money.
Exactly, it costs a lot of money. So, even a state actor like entity does not have infinite resources at an infinite time. So like Bitcoin does have the cockroach approach where if we just survive long enough, right, the atomic bomb that it is Bitcoin on the fiat system will wipe them out. So anyway, so sorry, Calle, go ahead.
So I just want to say, if you are up against someone with a money printer, I think you will have a hard time. It is just, they will be able to build infrastructure. They will be able to buy Bitcoin with it and build Bitcoin infrastructure as well. If you're really talking adversarial there, and probably there are numerous nodes out there already doing exactly that, just for tracking our payments, right? Just to correlate HTLCs with something else. But remember the guy called Zero Fee Routing?
Yes.
It was a node operator. For those listening from 2055, it was a node operator that started a node, so last year or so, 2021, called Zero Fee Routing, offered free routing. So no cost for nothing. And immediately people started flocking in, opening channels to the guy. I also opened a channel to the guy because it just makes sense. If you're running a Lightning node yourself, you don't have many channels yet. By a single hop through that guy, you have a great access to the entire network suddenly. So not naive users who don't care about their privacy or just want to have it fast or something. We're talking about node operators, which is next level already in terms of technical expertise. Just flocking onto this node because he undercut everyone by probably having a lot of capital, right? So it was. We're just lucky that it wasn't the CIA. Oh, we don't know if it wasn't actually, but we can be lucky that it was a Bitcoiner who just wanted to help the network, basically. But nothing prevents the next Zero Fee Routing guy to be NSA or something to do something very similar. And I'm very sure that the data that this guy could have gathered would have been, enormously helpful in order just to disrupt the network, just track the network, etc. So I think just silver lining here is, I guess, only the fact, and I don't see how we can really protect against this yet is that we can at least see that it's happening. We can measure the number of channels this node has. We can see, estimate the amount of capital that is needed for that. So at least there are, we can put up the warnings if it happens, which has happened in the case of zero-referral routing. Many people have been warning against it with good reasons, I think. So I only see that. I'm very, dark-pilled on this issue. If you fight against someone with a money printer, it's not gonna be that easy. No.
Yeah, I feel like Lightning has enjoyed quite a nice period of no true adversarial environment. You have a guy here and there trying to break a thing or two. Which is fantastic, but it hasn't really have a lot of people try to steal people's money, right? Because it is lower amounts too, which kind of helps, and the complexity, and I feel like most people who actually understand Lightning fully are working in Lightning companies. They're not, yet. That's going to change. It's very similar to how Bitcoin has never existed in a non-economically adversarial environment until now, right? Bitcoin always had essentially low interest rates, high money printing until recently when the interest rates went up, right? And Bitcoin took a fucking punch to the head, right? And we had the fiat maxis come in with FTX attack essentially on Bitcoin too, which they essentially inflated the Bitcoin supply. So it's kind of fascinating when these new sort of attacks that don't take the form that you would imagine, right? It's not a guy with a hood, with a keyboard, right? It's like the guys with a suit coming in from ways you don't expect. It's interesting to see how Lightning reacts, how the Lightning sort of industry reacts, and how people address some of these things. So what are some of the most famous attacks right now on Lightning, say the last 2 years?
Can I jump in on this? I think Burak's big fat transactions are probably
it's definitely the most famous.
Yeah, most famous.
That was fun.
Ones. I think those were two transactions that were just too big for some of the node implementations to handle. And I'm happy that it was fixed very fast. It shows that testing is very hard, testing for edge cases, also testing for intercompatibilities, right? So other node implementations didn't work, LND crashed. So that means there were possibilities that weren't explored during testing itself. And although it was fixed very, very fast, I think it's helpful to realize how Lightning works. That if you're a node runner, you had to get onto your keyboard and update your node as fast as possible, because in 2 weeks of time, or whatever that penalty transaction time is for your channels, you could have been dropped by someone who abuses that. I mean, this is just hypothetical. I don't know anyone who was actually attacked. I've heard of people who lost money due to technical issues that came at the same time as this transaction that just killed the nodes. But it was a very scary time because you needed to react fast. Lost money in the sense of that backups at the same time were corrupted or something. So something like that.
Yeah, the node crashed, poor state management, and, money gone, right?
Exactly. So not directly through the attack, but a secondary effect basically happening at the same time.
I mean, a lot of times that's what DDoS attacks achieve, right? I mean, they just break stuff out there. Not necessarily, it's just brute forcing the network, and a lot of network nodes break.
By the way, it's happening all the time. I think people are you're describing a peaceful state where
no. I mean peaceful state compared to normal non-Bitcoin related technology, right? I mean,
no, I'm saying everyone that runs the Lightning node is under attack.
Yeah.
Actively is being under attack. I'm sure Acinq has been attacked. The Breeze node has been attacked. Probing is a huge issue in the network. The network is constantly being probed. We all know that the channel analysis, they won a contract from the U.S. government to explore the Lightning network. So I'm in the same lines of Calle. I think There are entities that are taking part in the network right now, and the best interest of the network is not in their.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's their job. They literally have infinite budget to break shit. That's the NSA's job.
And we are seeing that. We are regularly seeing people trying to publish revoked commitment with our node. And we usually, that means we usually win some money because we usually realize them. And every month or so, we see that someone tried to publish a revoked commitment. So maybe it's a bug, maybe it's a probe, someone checking whether we are susceptible to some kind of attack. I think that some of those must be probes. It cannot be only bugs, and users are not complaining about it, whereas they should complain about it if it was a bug and they lost money. They should be able to realize that they lost money. So I think there are people probing the network, trying to attack it.
Do you guys set up traps? Sounds like a great way of making money.
Yeah.
Just set up a bunch that make it easier for them. Yeah, I love a honeypot.
Well, and I think Fork Monitor actually has a page that shows penalty transactions on the network. So if you, it's a fun thing to keep open in the background.
Very cool. So before sort of dive a little deeper into securing keys and all that stuff, I'd love to get a little bit in there. This is something that we do, so it's a lot of interest to me. Calle, I do want to bring up Cashu a little bit because it does have the best logo, so therefore it must be talked about. I mean, eCash banking is a super cool thing. It's a very old thing. It's older than Bitcoin, but it was never possible, realistically speaking, because there was no way to really anchor things before Bitcoin blocks were there to secure things. And then they found this new marriage through Lightning, and Fedi is something similar to, and I believe we're going to see a lot of implementations on this because it does solve a lot of it's a much more pleasant non-custodial solution for an IOU system that's not really an IOU system, for low economic sort of transactions between semi-trusted parties. It's a lot of garbled words here, but it's also not an easy to pin down description. I way back in the day, this must have been around 2013. One of the models that we saw for the CoinKite payment terminals and debit cards was so that you could have a village in a place that is very poor with one terminal, and then that one terminal could bank everybody in that group because it cost the hardware cost of the internet at the time and all that stuff. And they would use our cards and some form of IOU between them that would then clear on chain. This is way back then, completely uncooked back then. But now, this is actually possible, and you're doing some of that with Cashu. And why don't you give us a little bit of an explanation of Cashu and what do you envision for it and how you're playing with it?
So yeah, sure. So Cashu is an implementation of eCash that is built on Bitcoin software. So eCash is from this guy called David Chong, who was a cypherpunk cryptographer, and it was 1982 where he released a paper just describing this blinded signature scheme to build a banking app, basically, or a banking system that relies not on the classical ledger system that we know. If you imagine what a bank knows about you is basically all your data, and then there is a table in which it says, Calle sent NVK $100, NVK sent t-bast $50, and so on. So there are entries in this ledger. Everyone is fully transparent, and that is kind of the idea. The bank needs to know who has what in order to be able to offer banking services. So eCash is a way to just get rid of all of this and replace it with a cryptographic blind signature scheme in which the bank, to keep it short, the bank doesn't know you or doesn't need to know you. It doesn't know your balance because you don't really have a bank balance. What it does, though, is to give you small pieces of data, which is eCash. eCash is data that you then store on your hard disk or on your smart card or whatever hardware you have. And this data, you can take this data and just exchange it with anyone and use it at the bank to use their service on the money network that the bank operates on. Now, this was tried on the fiat banking network and it failed due to many different reasons. I would guess that one of the biggest reasons why it failed is because it was fiat, and with eCash comes privacy, and just imagine someone offering a private bank account today.
No, I mean, not just that. I mean, you can print tokens, but you can't lie about the printing of the tokens, right? So, like with fiat, it's like a ledger based on nothing.
Well, I mean, there was a DigiCash called Company by David Chom doing exactly that. So you can, there was a bank, there was a eCash wallet that you had on your computer, and you could use it as something like PayPal offers as an experience today. And this was 1995, so this was
straight to jail
before PayPal, straight to jail, exactly. So
no, every single thing, Liberty Reserve, like eGold, like the U.S. government doesn't care if you want to have magic internet money that tries to compete with gold, but as soon as you try to print dollars, right, which is essentially what all these things are, straight to jail.
Exactly. So this idea died with I would say almost died with this software or a company that came and went again, and it was dormant for, I don't know, 15, 20 years almost, until Bitcoiners came, and even Satoshi refers to eCash in the beginning. So this whole system was very old. But it took Bitcoin, I guess, to come into the internet and just become the currency of the internet. So people started being interested in it again. And we've seen Fedi operating on this framework, building custodial community banking services, basically. And with Cashu, there's something very similar, that you can you run your own Lightning node, and then on top of that you can install Cashu. And with Cashu now you can issue those untrackable, untraceable IOUs to your users. So it's a custodial system that is important to remember. It's not a layer 3 or something of Bitcoin. It is a fully separate system of Bitcoin, but it is built for Bitcoin, basically, to use Bitcoin. And so it is a custodial system, but it has many applications, I think, in the future for, I was on Stacker News just tipping some sats recently. And Stacker News is like the bank in the 90s, or, every bank today. Stacker News knows who has what, who transacts with whom, and etc. All this information, and that's fine, because it's just Stacker News, and I don't care. But it just shows you that of course I would like to pay with my Lightning node on Stacker News and not have a balance at all. But we've previously established already that it won't be possible to open channels for everyone on the planet just at one go, and especially if you have multiple services that you're using, right? You're not only using Stacker News, you're also using 15 other services at the same time. So custodial services are probably here to stay somehow, and eCash is kind of like a strict improvement of the privacy features of any custodial service that you can think of today. And my vision of this whole project of resurrecting Chom and eCash again is just to plug this into everything that we have today already. It could be hosted channels, it could be Stacker News. It is Cashu now, which is just one app that uses this protocol that we're working on, so that building eCash systems will become as easy as building ledger-based systems in the future.
Cashu and other, eCash systems are 1,000 times better than IOUs, right? Or because a lot of these Lightning sort of playgrounds, let's call them that, right? The Stacker News and things like that. I don't know about Stacker News per se, but just saying there's a lot of those that are essentially an IOU system where you do have a Lightning account there, but it's not kind of yours. You just have a claim on a SAT, and then they send it out. But it's still sort of like a communal wallet that the Lightning playground sort of maintains as theirs, really, right? You don't have the private keys, let's put it this way. And, that's a lot easier for you to bootstrap a website that emulates Hacker News, right? But I think the sentiment, and this is what I loved about Cashu when I first started to see it, and I'm very thankful that you did all the development in public on Twitter. It proves that like you can still do these playground things, but instead of using IOUs, start using something that is a lot more representative of an actual token of ownership. And they're not credits either. It's unfortunate. We don't have a good fiat analogy to it, which is kind of a great thing, but is very hard for people to sort of wrap their heads around. It's, it's not miles either. It's not like, it's just...
I mean, they're kind of like casino chips, right? Like you go to the casino,
yes.
you hand them $100, they give you a stack of chips. I could go and give chips to t-bast, and the Calle who's running the cash register doesn't know that transaction happened, because it was just a straight peer-to-peer transaction where I handed these tokens to t-bast. T-bast goes and redeems them with Calle, and Calle doesn't know that those chips are the same ones that he gave me.
That's a fantastic analogy.
Yeah, it's still custodial, but it's custodial, but the custodian is blinded to what you're doing.
And also the custodian is the only one that can print that money. And it's also not IOU either, right? Because there's no account to the casino. You just have your pile of chips. You're a sovereign inside the casino.
Yeah, it's a little bearer token. If you lose your chips, you've lost your money, right? And like that's it. And when Calle was talking about the evolution of these things, I think Lightning was kind of the missing piece, because one of the real problems that you would have if you went and tried to build this, disconnected from Lightning, is you have to bootstrap the entire economy inside of your eCash system, right? Like people need places to go and buy and sell goods and services with their eCash tokens. But if your eCash tokens are compatible with Lightning, then you can plug into the whole Lightning ecosystem, and I can run a mint and Calle can run a mint.
You're not running an exchange spot at the cashier.
Exactly.
Which is the problem that Bitcoin still has in the world, just the economic dynamics, right? I mean, people are still doing stuff with spots from exchanges, but
I think this is a very important point that you just made there, Rijndael, because people will keep building things like Stacker News, where you have an SQL table in which it says I have this much and I'm sending. It's very easy to build, and that's kind of the point. It will be built because it's easy to build, and we've been talking a lot about complicated things today, but also ways to make it easier, because as it turned, if you want to maximize the number of instances of your idea, you have to make it easy. You can see that all over the place. Just the number of developers that you can attract basically is a linear function of how hard it is to implement the proposition that proposal that you're making. So
Yeah, so aside from the scamming part of shitcoins, right? Like, when you look at what colored coins, which became Ethereum later on and all this stuff, there is an insane demand, right? It's said that 99.99% of those things are sort of like very sort of like poorly morally aligned with a world that we want to see. But there is this incredible demand to create essentially a token, right? It's a digital representation of like some ownership of something, right? That in their case is owning a cut in a business idea or a stupid digital contract that doesn't live in whatever. I'm not going to go into the shitcoin space, but what I think it's important to sort of like accept and realize is that there is this massive demand for sort of like Bitcoin on-chain thing that represents something else and has a different security model that provides a different set of security trade-offs, privacy trade-offs, and also cost trade-offs, a lot cheaper, right? Because you don't have to have an on-chain transaction. There's a bunch of things around that. And I just feel like we're finally starting to explore this in a more sort of sane way, because we did have those attempts of colored coins with, .bit and RSK and RGB and all that stuff. All that stuff like didn't take off because it was like super complicated, super like bloated. It required a lot of things. And like now we have like something like Cashu where you're like, okay, like you just poof, set it up and poof, you're like ready to go. I know it's very early and, t-bast and Roy are very focused on the Lightning mission and, like, let's get poor people a bank, and all this stuff. But like, is this something you guys are looking at? Like for like near future integration? Like, do you guys have like a clear vision for how this sort of participates in this like end user life? Or is this something like you guys just sort of completely like, look at this later, it's cool and all, but
For me, like I don't argue with the market. Like if there's a demand in the market, maybe the market is right, but I still trying to understand why we would need anything but Bitcoin, to be honest. Like I sorry for being the maxi here, but why do we need it? Like why can't we use Lightning for it?
So, like I am the kind of maxi that hated on Lightning. So like, I'm coming here, I used to say real men do it in the base layer. The problem is this, and like, I abhor the shitcoining and all that stuff. It's just that we can't do everything on the base layer. It's not going to happen. Economically speaking, not going to happen.
I'm not talking about the base layer. Why not do it? But let's do it on the second layer. Like, why? What's wrong with the second layer?
So wait, let me ask here. So because I'm on your side, right? So we should keep it to Bitcoin only, always. So it's not a shitcoin or anything, just to make that clear. But if that is true, what you said, and I want it to be true, you say?
I'm asking. I don't know. I don't know.
Why do things like, we're taking Stacker News all the time, but why do things like Stacker News exist? Why don't people build a website with the first thing in their mind is to keep it non-custodial, right?
Because I agree with you that the tools are not there. By the way, like we also try to put our efforts in making the non-custodial tools much easier, but non-custodial, t-bast knows that better than me. Doing non-custodial Lightning is very hard. Now, it's up to us to lower the barrier of entry that everyone will be able to write non-custodial Lightning apps.
See, but right, you still have a cost of capital to keeping those channels open, right? Like what Fedi Mint and the Xiaomi eCash stuff offers is, like the way I like to see it is like you have essentially like base layer, that's Fedwire, right? Like we're talking about like high, big economic capable transactions here, right? Or things that are anchoring there just because it's worth it for them to pay that fee, right? And then you have Lightning where, like it cents for me, but it still has cost per transaction, right? Like it costs money, right? And then essentially like the way I see the eCash stuff is more like
a Lightning transaction or onboarding a user to Lightning. That's two separate things.
Yeah, but see, this is the thing. As a user or a company who's not a Lightning technology maker, I just see sats disappear when I make transactions, right?
What's wrong with that? It means that there's incentives in place.
Right. But now if I'm running a website, right, that I'm trying to not have an IOU system, right, have actual token representation of those exchanges, say a web casino.
But Cashu is an IOU. You keep saying that it's not an IOU. It is an IOU. It's the definition of IOU.
No, because you can own the token, right?
That doesn't mean anything if the token... Calle, do you think Cashu isn't an IOU?
No, I would also say, I think IOU is just something that we know from the fiat world. So probably it's not an IOU in the classical sense, but
That's right.
We just need to make clear that if you own a Cashu token, you don't have the Bitcoin. You have the Bitcoin only if you have the keys to that Bitcoin.
It's a banknote, right? Like I bank at the Bank of Calle, and he gives me a note.
The casino chip that you described before is an IOU because at the end of the day,
No, it's not because... it is and it isn't, right?
Yeah, because the casino owes you.
See, do you know what guys do? They go to strip joints. Yeah. This is how they money laundry, okay? They go to a casino. They get a massive pile of chips, okay? They get the big chips. They go outside of the casino. So they're outside of the bounded environment. They give it to a stripper. A stripper goes back to the casino and takes it out as cash.
Okay, so that's an IOU. That's a definition of IOU.
Yes.
That's the fact that you were able to pass the IOU from one entity to another, that's great. But it's still an IOU.
So it is...
So the bearer asset, let's talk about the bearer asset. The bearer asset, do you guys see a world where there are more assets other than Bitcoin? If yes, I see a need for Cashu as well. If not, I think we can build tools. We can build tools that will make non-custodial and even custodial Bitcoin easier to use. And in that world, I don't know. Like, is there a need for Cashu?
Right.
Yeah.
How do you see the future of, pre-provisioning liquidity for 100 million people? Right. Like if you need to pre-provision $100.
Why do we need to pre-provision? Why do we need to do that? What's the use case?
I install a Lightning wallet. I want to be able to immediately receive a payment. You need to open a channel to me, and you need to guess how big that channel is. And you're not going to make it the exact size of my incoming payment. You're going to pad that incoming channel with extra capacity so that I can, get another payment in, right? Like if I install Breeze today and I try to receive $5 over Lightning, the Breeze LSP is going to open a channel to me.
Yeah.
And it's not just going to open a channel for that $5. It's going to open it for an extra, 500,000 sats.
It's a business decision. It depends on your pattern and your usage pattern, but it can be only the $5. You don't need to add credit to Bitcoin. That's what I'm saying, basically.
See, like, this is the thing. It's such a weird mind space for me to be in, because I'm normally the one who's like, really, some of you know me for a little longer than others. Like, I don't think it gets more maxi than I do. It's a fascinating thing because, I do see a space where you do have a need for something like this eCash banking working, just because of this complete different sets of trade-offs.
I agree with that. By the way, Fedimin for me makes sense. Like, if you have a school use case that Calle brought up, if the school want to be the custodian or there are several entities within a community that want to be the custodian of users' funds and they're doing Bitcoin, why not? But I still don't understand the Cashu use case. Sorry, guys.
Wait, so I don't know if we're on the same page here. So just on an abstract level, the difference between Fedimin and Cashu is just the multisig. So you have either one server managing it all or 5 servers managing it all. Basically, it doesn't really change anything about the dynamics of how you handle the tokens. First thing, but I just want to come back and I think find an agreement between you and me, because I think there is one. This is just a sentence that I'm gonna leave. Is if you believe that custodial things should exist or will exist, even if they shouldn't, but will exist. eCash is a strict improvement of the privacy features and many other features that are secondary, maybe, of this, right? So if you believe that the entire world will use Bitcoin without any custodian involved, then maybe there is no place for that, because we can build the Lightning Network, up infinitum and give everyone a channel, because we invent new things that we don't know about today.
I think that's a very good sort of like mental model to use. That eCash is a huge improvement over custodial. If you do believe custodial must exist or will exist, even if we don't like it, I think we're at a better place.
I would agree with that. So we are in a complete agreement. But the question that you've asked, Enrique, is how do we see that fit into our own stack? And what we're trying to promote is strictly non-custodial stack.
That's fair.
And strictly peer-to-peer stack. So in that regard, I'm kind of...
No, it's very fair. It's a great answer. Yeah. It really is. I mean, we're looking for like honesty here, right? Like in terms of like, where do players and where do people who build the technology, like where their mind is at, where they're going, right? Because I listen to like, other pods, and I listen to like, it's a huge reason why I started this is that like, it's just people sort of like circle jerking, right? Sort of like, like you don't want to be mean to a competitor, you don't want to like sort of like piss on somebody else's work. I feel like, like there is a place. I'll take
it even one step further. Even Taro, which is natively built on, can be natively built on a non-custodial stack. Even Taro is something that I'm on the fence when it comes to like adding new tokens on non-custodial Lightning.
No, I called it a shitcoin. No, it's like, I think the biggest issue is that like me personally, like I don't I'm not that interested in using it as much for at least for like real world sort of applications. And I'm not talking about Cashu. I'm talking about just sort of this idea of like tokens in general on top of things. But like, I think there's a market, like a huge market for this. And I think like a huge part of this market is not scammy and it's trying to sort of like suss out like how can I do this thing I want to do, right? Because Bitcoin is not going to change for anybody. I think this last few years made it very clear to people that want to like change Bitcoin to achieve their preferred sort of like intentions, right? So like if that is zero confirmation stuff, if that is bigger blocks, if that is CTV, if that like, you know, it doesn't matter how cool it is, how great it is, how well intentioned you are, like Bitcoin's purpose is starting to become very obvious to most people who are new to Bitcoin, right? Like, it's like, we are trying to replace central banks here. This is a store of fucking value, right? Like, it's not going to change. Everything serves at the pleasure of star value, right? Even the salability, the uncensorship of Bitcoin has nothing to do with privacy.
And that's why I like Cashu, by the way, because it doesn't pretend to be something that it ain't. The fact that it's completely different from Bitcoin, like it doesn't have the presumptions to be Bitcoin or Bitcoin related. That's the thing I like about it. Like it's very understandable that it's a completely separate system.
Well, and like one way that I like to think about it is, you know, like we want to get as many people on Lightning as possible. A lot of folks are going to onboard through custodial setups. Cashu or Fedimint are strictly better because of privacy. So if we do nothing else, but, you know, there are people running custodial Lightning wallets on top of Cashu, and then as the tooling gets better from, you know, places like Breeze and places like Phoenix, more and more of those users can shift to non-custodial Lightning, but there's still a better place for people to be if they're going to be in a custodial situation. It's just a strict improvement.
I mean, we're going to need a funnel, right?
Everyone is nodding in the circle. So I just, you know, to come back to also the beginning, in the beginning I said, there is a spectrum of custody today. We have to leave this framework of the big bank is the big one that controls everything, and I'm just the user who can do nothing. You can run it on your own node. And if it's 5 people that you serve this to, then serve it, because they don't maybe know yet how to run their own node. And maybe, you know, you guys are making excellent wallets that even, you know, complete regarded people can actually use and have a real node on their phone. But just, you know, it's not going to be the big corporation that is trying to rug you. It will be the sports group. It will be the school. It will be these local communities that need kind of a banking. As long as we don't have infinitely fast, infinitely capable Lightning and Bitcoin, we will always need banking in some way. Yeah.
Calle, I think you should really trademark is that Cashu, not good for scammers.
I mean, you can rug. You can, if you have a huge instance where people just put millions of Satoshis in there because they want to use your service, you can close a node, close all channels, and I don't know, go to the Bahamas or something. There is the possibility of being rugged, obviously. But if you keep those custodians small, the chances are getting, chance of getting hit is getting smaller. My vision of a eCash wallet, that works, with Lightning in the future is you have something on your phone. This is a custodial wallet, but your custodian is not one single entity. It is maybe 120 different entities that you have encountered during the use of this wallet, and your balance on these entities is 250 euros or something, right? Where the risk is very low. But the reason why you can do this now is because none of them knows you. You don't have accounts at them. They don't know what you're doing, basically. And you can just pay your Lightning invoices in exchange for these eCash tokens, basically. Yeah.
I think that's a much, much more elegant solution than Liquid. Like Liquid was the first attempt. It carried a lot of baggage from being so early. It's like pre-Lightning really, you know what I mean? Pre-Lightning being usable, right? So I think there is a market for something like that, and Liquid just didn't take off because it's like this clunky, complicated thing that doesn't have competing federations, and you can't just spin up one yourself. But, like I remember when Tether was actually seriously investigating it because like they needed a way of moving their stuff, let's call it on liquid chain as opposed to just databases between exchanges, right? And, they couldn't use Bitcoin. They were a nominee for a very long time. And then they had to move to Vitalik's chain. And, I think there is a place for these alternative ways of moving capital around. It could be the little guy, it could be a big guy. I still think that like we're still missing the Lightning similar level of network, but the competing idea that to me is like one of the biggest sort of like shames of like having 50 papers for payment channels and like essentially like there's like one Lightning, let's call it this way. There is no sort of like a different thing that is not Lightning per se. It's likely incompatible with Lightning, but it does solve similar problems like competing with it. Maybe that's a good thing for bootstrapping now, but I want to see more L2 stuff happening. I see Cashu more as like an L3 kind of thing.
I don't know. I don't call it that. I just want to be very strict on my definitions.
That's fair.
I don't, for me, a layer of Bitcoin means you need to get the on-chain money at some point if you want, without the cooperation of anyone. This is, that's why I think, I know two layer twos in my definition, which is Lightning and the other one is state chains. In my
Mercury
mind,
wallet.
Sorry?
Mercury wallet.
Mercury wallet, exactly the only implementation of state chains that I know. And I don't know any L3. I don't think that we will see an L3 soon.
Like the way I look at L3 is more like, it's like custodians. Like, if you think about not technically speaking, but just like practically speaking, that's who they are. It's the people running, really interacting with the Bitcoin network, right? Like making the transactions for users. They are IOUs. But like from a user perspective, they are L3s, like let's call it this way. And then, but from their perspective, they're doing transactions on base layer, right? But at the end of the day, like there's a human who has a claim to that IOU, right, on Coinbase, and they're an integral part of the system, when like it or not. It's a shame Peter Todd didn't manage to double spend all their balance back in the day, but yeah, like I think it's just gonna get messier and messier and messier and messier, right? This is a network that you don't need permission. So anyways, I don't want to take too much of a tangent there.
You inspired me of this thought. We were speaking about competing L2s. I'm also kind of looking forward to a time where we have not only one Lightning network, but we will speak of multiple Lightning networks. I'm curious if there's anyone here in the round who has thought about this. If you can see some parallel network also springing up at some point or not.
The protocol is different than Lightning, or I definitely think there's a future of multiple networks within the Lightning network. That's what I think we're already starting to see this type of scenarios where there's like network, like the podcasting network, because it's very low on fees, they kind of act like a separate network within the Lightning network. You mean that, or you mean like a completely different protocol?
I mean incompatible parts of the net, so not really sub-networks, which you maybe refer to, but one example could be these Taro assets that people are talking about. The USD shitcoin on your Taproot tree is not compatible with a Satoshi on the main, on the Lightning network. One way of how they want to solve, Lightning Labs wants to solve this, is to add the nodes that are incompatible with the rest just at the end of the network and let them communicate through Bitcoin through an exchange rate.
Yes.
Like you really need an oracle that says what's the conversion rate. But what they could have at the edges, exactly. But what they could have also done, which is absolutely impractical, is to bootstrap a new network that just does USD stuff.
Well, I think that's what Omnibolt and RGB are planning on doing. Is if you have your USD token on RGB or Omnibolt or something, you actually stand up a parallel Lightning network that has its own liquidity, its own network, and it's a completely separate network. And you might have nodes that run, LND on both networks, and those two can bridge assets and do, sort of cross network swaps or something. But you lose all of the network effects of the current Lightning network. Like you really have a difficult cold start problem.
I think you're right regarding only Bolt, but I think RGB is very similar to Tower in that regard. That is fully Bolt compatible.
Oh, is it? Okay, I might be out of date on what they're doing.
Cool. So, guys, I guess I don't know how you guys are doing your time, but maybe just do a quick pivot here on security, and then we sort of wrap up. Unless we just sort of all love the conversation so much that we end up just staying a little bit longer. But I think some of you guys have to go at some point soon. So, I've seen the spec for VLS. I've seen nodes getting robbed. Hotkeys are a complicated problem. Hotkeys with complex HSM policies are very tricky. Pre-Bitcoin, the money was never in the server, right? You could always, a bank could always just sort of cancel, it's reverse the ledger, right? Or call up the other bank and try to get the wire back. Sometimes it went away already, but most of the time, there is a mulligan there. You know what I mean? With Bitcoin, even though technically speaking, the money is not in the server, it's just a claim, the money's in the server. Right? That private key is the money. So in Bitcoin base layer, we're solving a lot of these problems and I'm talking about consumers and sort of base layer operations, hardware wallet, you put it in your code card, boom, you're fine, you're safe, right? It's not on the internet. We built the CK bunker thing so you can have a code card hot to do interactions with it. And, it does incur extra risk. So the hotter you are, right, the more at risk your funds are. I think we've been fortunate and there's some better security practices now. And that's why we don't see a lot of Lightning companies getting completely taken for a ride by bad guys taking over your servers. What are some of the approaches that Lightning companies are sort of taking to managing those hot wallets, right? Are you guys using enterprise sort of HSMs, Tails boxes? Are you guys, building your own stuff? Where is everybody at with this, the actual servers that have money on? Where are we at to the technology now?
On our side, I don't want to spoil the fun because we're going to release a blog post in the next couple of weeks or months that talks in depth about that.
Nobody listens to this podcast, so you can talk about it.
No, we've been playing with that for a while, since the beginning of Lightning, basically. We've been experimenting with something pre-VLS, how to run some of the stuff in HSM, how to use trusted, how to potentially use a trusted environment, all of the things that could have helped us. And it really gets complex because you start simple, but then you just realize that you have plugged one hole, but there are so many holes that are remaining. If the attacker is on your machine, even if you have put the keys elsewhere, there are still a lot of ways that they can steal your money. And Lightning is really a complex beast here, especially when you start. It depends on what you are doing on your node. If you are only, for example, receiving and sending payments, it's simpler. But if you are also routing, that creates new opportunities for an attacker to exfiltrate money. If you are also handling swaps, that adds yet another attack vector for attackers, even if you're protecting your keys. So it really gets complex, and you end up, and VLS is realizing that you end up pulling all of the Lightning logic and all of the channel states inside the signer, and basically you end up almost running your entire node inside the signer, inside the secure hardware.
But that's the traditional HSM approach, right? You have a secure enclave, and this is more like complex HSM environments, right? Secure enclave, you have all the check boxes that make it ELAC 6 and sort of FIP certified, and everybody stamps. Really, it's for insurance, but it's full of holes still. And then the other issue is your stack is often the biggest problem. It's not the box that they actually did a good job securing it. It's the arbitrary code you're running inside the secure enclave.
Yeah, that's true. And so it's a really hard story, much harder than people think. We've had years experimenting with it. Nobody is yet happy with any solution that is out there, and I think it's still going to take us years before we are happy with our setups and security setups. But that is really important, because if some big node gets hacked and loses all of their Bitcoin, it's going to be really bad. So.
Oh, I mean, like you could be, say, for even if you have good capital controls and like you de-risk things by, like how you do your stuff. But like at the end of the day, the amount of users you have on your platform with balances, those balances are hot, right? Because you don't know if your user is going to spend it now or is going to spend it in an hour or is going to spend it in a month. So like their channels are open and those funds are at risk.
Their funds are at risk in what way? Their funds aren't at risk. The funds on your end of the channels.
Sure. But like whoever has the side of the channel that has the funds essentially hot on a server or a phone or something, whenever you have a key, a private key, okay, in anything that is connected, right, you are at risk.
Yes, there is risk. Yes. The only advice that I would give like node runners, go back to the basics. Yes, there's not a good solution right now. It is a hot wallet, accept the risk.
Yep.
But be smart about the risk, meaning don't install anything on your server.
Yep.
Not Thunder Hub and not any UI that you want to use. Keep it to the bare minimum of a Lightning node. Be very careful on the admin tools that you deploy. Take a look hard on the admin processes that you use in order to manage the node. How do you manage the node? How do you access the machine? Like, go back to the basics. Don't install anything on your machine.
We used to, like, the way we handled, because we were doing custodial Bitcoin, right? Like in the early days, and like there was about $4 billion worth of Bitcoin in the system. Tails could not sign Bitcoin, right, at the time. FIPS would not certify Bitcoin Curve. I don't know if it does now or not. I stopped looking way back then. And we had this FreeBSD boxes that we built the hardware mostly from scratch. We potted them, and they were essentially like read-only, right? So we had the OS that we sort of packaged together, and like it was very specific use. And in order to spin one up, you had to get it signed by a different one. So you had like this quorum of a few boxes. They had to talk to each other, all read-only. They had to be physically accessed in order to spin them up to talk to the other one. And like it was a complete runaround, right? And it was like all day being like attempted attacks, right? And these things are running on like Tor to each other, right? So they have a completely VLAN. And like, in those days, I mean, there was a lot less attention, and we felt like unsafe, right? So like, then multisig appeared, and we were able to multisig out most of the users. So like they were not like hot on us. We don't want your bags, please. Long story short, like you do have like this issue with the hotkeys, and like I'm trying to understand like where are you guys at really, like in terms of like solutions, right? Because I see a lot of like kids around sort of like, running, whatever cool version of Linux they like, and, and they will put all those dashboards in and and there is USB access, physical access. It's all kinds of shit. Like, I mean, people that work in security will understand this, but like general purpose computers were not designed to hold secrets. And they will spill out the beans, right? You think you're protected because you have disk encryption. Well, did you compile that disk encryption implementation from a compiler that you compiled? Like how deep back into the chain of software are you going, right? Like, is the case like, like RF shielded? Like, it gets tricky fast. You can't use your standard data centers, like, so I kind of want to, I have no idea, like the current state of like how most Lightning companies are handling this. I imagine it's like a lot of them are just sort of like buying a Tails box and running everything in their like secure enclave and sort of hoping for the best for now.
We try to control the entire stack. That's what we try to do. From the operating system to every piece of software installed on the server, we try to compile it. We try to to own it. There is, I just want to add something when it comes to Lightning. There is something that is good with Lightning that helps kind of mitigate the private key issue. We don't hold a lot of Bitcoins that is outside of the channel, meaning the on-chain balance that we have is only there in order to fulfill the channel creation needs. Out of that, everything is in channels. When you have everything in channels, it's going to help mitigate against an attack because you are not supposed to send money out of your channel. Like we are, as an LSP, we're not sending payments through our channels. So whenever there's a payment that's being sent through our channel, there's an alert in our system. That's one thing, and we monitor every channel closed. So when we'll start seeing channels closed, then we know we have an issue because we are not closing these channels.
That's very interesting. I totally missed that part from like just thinking about Lightning security. That's a great de-risking, like just natural dynamic of like how Lightning works. Maybe that's why I'm not seeing what I was expecting, which is like, just companies, every week announcing on Twitter, hey, we got robbed.
It's hard to rob a channel. That's basically if your funds are spread out through tens of thousands of channels, and you're trying to. You have two ways on how you can rob a channel. One is to make a payment from this channel, and we don't make payment from our channels, so we know that. Or you try to close the channel to an address, to the attacker address, and then it should be flagged out very quickly in our system.
Very cool.
But don't you use upfront shutdown script to ensure that an attacker cannot even close the channel to an external address?
You're asking if I don't think we have anything customized. Well, that's also another trade-off that I
think LND did it much later than others, but you can specify when you open the channel what address has to be used at closing time, and your peer will enforce that so that the attacker cannot change the closing address when they get to your machine.
Yeah, not on forced close, on close, but not on forced close.
Well, and that's the kind of logic that, when people were talking about running part of the Lightning state machine inside of an HSM or something, like that's the kind of policy that you'd want to enforce, right? Like, okay, exactly. I've got some Thales HSM or some other lockdown environment that has some version of like remote attestation or, consensus based up, bring up or something. I have the business logic in there that says, these are the only addresses that you can close to. And, I'm never going to sign a payment that changes my net balance by more than such amount, right? Like the future, a lot of this stuff is having enough Lightning state machine inside of a lockdown environment that you can enforce policy over your channels. That's one direction that I've been looking a lot at. And then the other part of it, but it gets tricky, is when we have taproot channels, being able to do things like Frost or, Musig, MPC for your keys. So this is kind of like, imagine being able to have multi-sig for your Lightning keys. So instead of there just being one key that signs all of your updates, it's in two different servers, or it's in a server and a phone or something. Mm-hmm. And one of those environments can have an HSM that has a Lightning state machine inside of it. You run into all the same problems that t-bast mentioned about like, how do you bootstrap those things? Like, where do you keep the root secrets? Can you run all of VLS inside of a Thales HSM? Like all of those problems still exist, but it's a way that we can get away from just having single keys on a server.
Like when we were selling or looking to sell the enterprise HSMs that we made to BitGo and companies like that, this is way back, we started to see companies like Fireblock starting to come in, right? And like essentially offer, like all the things that meet old school fiat compliance checkboxes, even though they might have holes or not be that secure or whatever, but they fit the compliance. And this actually got us to this awful world now where essentially Fireblocks is becoming BIS for these big piles of money in Bitcoin, right? So you have Fireblocks becoming the clearinghouse for just bank diffs, right? So like they're not even moving the Bitcoin anymore. They're just sort of doing the diffs at the end of the day between 2-3 large institutions, where you have this, like, it's not a great dynamic, right? You just have this big piles of Bitcoin in capturable big entities. So I guess like this is like a backdoor question to like, is there people working on sort of like, let's call it sovereign hardware, right? Like, or actual boxes, like actual metal for Lightning that does incentivize the opposite behavior, right? Like you want to see Lightning companies sort of like going towards like, having their own metal as opposed to eventually finding themselves in a firebox of sorts just because of the checkbox dynamic.
That would be great to see, but I don't know anyone working on that. And I think it's potentially because it's hard to monetize if it doesn't work, and you have to bring cost up front to do all the work before you're able to sell anything. So I'd love to see that, but it's hard to bootstrap.
That's harder. No, but maybe the multi-sig with Frost, maybe we can resolve the hardware problem with more encryption. You know what I mean? Like, no, seriously, like Bitcoin already did that to money, right? Like it completely inverted the security symmetry, right? Before it was the bank that essentially held the keys to the money because it was too expensive for you to self-custody all the gold in your house with a shotgun, right? Bitcoin did the opposite. Now you have just this encryption key and maybe it's decentralized, right? But you have like 2-3 locations for your multi-sig. Now the guy can beat you to death, but he can't get the money. So like, maybe it is something like Frost that does resolve that. I don't understand Lightning enough to have an educated opinion on like how you guys can resolve this. I'm just sort of like curious. Listen, guys, I think with that is, this was fantastic conversation. I am super, super thankful that you all sort of gave me 2 hours of your time, and you guys are busy people building cool shit. So thank you so much. So I guess like any closing thoughts, I'll ask like each of you sort of, if it's an actual thought, if it's something you want to show, if it's like, please like let people know this is a more sophisticated audience of like probably 10 people who listen to this pod. So they might be looking for jobs too. So, if you guys are looking for technical people, if you guys are looking for whatever, do sort of like state your piece. So why don't I go in order of windows on my window here? So t-bast, like any final thoughts?
It looks like from the outside that Lightning has been stable for a while and no new things have been shipped, but that's actually because we have done all the easy stuff already and we have finished that already. So all the things that remain are the hard stuff. So it takes a while to build, but a lot of cool things are happening and are finally making progress after years of waiting. So you're going to see a lot of cool things happening in 2023 and being shipped in Lightning implementations and mobile wallets. So keep an eye out for that, and I hope people will like it.
How people can find you?
Oh, on mostly GitHub, under the Acinq repo organization, and otherwise on Twitter at real t-bast and Acinq_co.
Cool. Calle, final thoughts?
Yeah, I don't have final thoughts. I just want to shill. I just want to shill L2 to everyone listening. Someday we will have a fork, hopefully. It's called eCash any prev out, and we need it to solve this terrible, frightening situation of Lightning backups that I'm having. So anyone listening here, please keep it in mind that eCash any prev out is something that you should look into, and L2. And otherwise, if you're interested in Cashu and interested in building a protocol specification out of it with me, then just hit me up on Calle BTC on Twitter and everywhere else.
Thank you. Roy.
Yes, I think it's great. Everyone should use Lightning. I think that it was interesting to see your journey. Like I've been following your tweets, NVK, on like your latest.
Oh, I'm sorry you follow me.
on the latest interaction with Lightning Wallet, and I think that you would attest to that we come a long way.
A long fucking way. Like seriously, like it's quite amazing, really, what the Lightning space has done. Like I mean. I can send Bitcoin for cheap instantly. I mean, as a user, that's what I want, right? Now just cut those fees.
Yeah, exactly. And there are services and there are applications being built on top of that. Therefore, the latest proliferation of like Lightning applications is really mind blowing. So to go with the theme of this podcast, I would say that you should expect non-custodial Lightning development to become also much easier as time goes by. We are taking an active part of that. We've released a pre-alpha version of our SDK, and basically everyone can use the Breeze infrastructure as a service. So now, if you want to build a new Stack Your News, which is completely non-custodial, or a music application, or a trading application, or whatever, our stack is at your service. So feel free to take a look at that. Breeze.technology. You can also follow Breeze_tech on Twitter.
Congrats on your raise. Thank you.
Thank you.
Rij.
Yeah. So something that we didn't really talk about today, I think for a lot of developers, Lightning is kind of an easier API to write against than layer 1 Bitcoin if you want to just build an application that
Really? I find it completely the opposite.
I don't know, man. Like, I think if you use like, LN bits, or if you want to go straight to like the gRPC interface on LND or something.
Or even WebLN or LN URL
Or even WebLN, right? Like there's lots of really good tooling out there for building stuff on top of Lightning. So I'd say if you're one of the 10 people listening to this and you want to build some application that sends or receives Bitcoin, you might want to look at, building it with Lightning. It's easier than you think, especially if you use something like Roy's new SDK, or if you use LN bits or something else. So I would just chill that, like go build shit on top of Lightning.
So say, for example, we as a company, we want to accept Lightning. But first, I need to move our shopping cart to SegWit, which is not being done yet. But second is we want to accept Lightning payments. We don't want custodial Lightning for this because privacy of users and our privacy and all that stuff. We have a CLN node. We have a Bitcoin on it for a year that probably not connected to anything. So if we didn't want to do the runaround and sort of start doing stuff from scratch, which is normally what we do, what would be a reasonable solution for, a Python shop with a bunch of boomer devs to sort of like go sort of like, build something that integrates with what we already built and get going?
I would chill LN bits if Calle is not going to do that.
Yeah, definitely. I was going to say LN bits, but Calle's here, so Calle should say LN bits.
Yeah, you should definitely look into LN bits. LN bits is basically software that you put onto your Lightning node, and you can, you're fully self-custodial, but you have a very easy to use API to talk to your node. That's probably what was, alluded to before, that it's becoming so easy to work on Lightning. Tools like LN bits and anything basically that abstracts the node away for you is very, very easy to use these days. So if you know a little bit of Python, and not even that, if you can talk to a REST API.
Is it Python?
Yes, it's Python.
Oh, we're sold.
Well, and on top of that, it also gives you this nice accounts abstraction. So if you've got your core Lightning node and you want to build your shopping cart and you want to make sure that a bug in your shopping cart doesn't like spend all of your money or destroy your node or something, you can carve off like a little sub account and your bugs will only have access to the liquidity in that sub account.
Very cool.
It's like a little firewall for your money.
Exactly. So it allows you to open up many accounts for free, and you can use a REST API to talk to your Lightning node, accept payments, send payments, and stuff like that. So look into lnbits.com.
So Rijndael, are those your final thoughts, or do you have more final thoughts? You get a second go.
Cool. I'll do a second one, which is just there's lots of folks hiring Lightning developers. So if you are looking for a job in this space, definitely look at Bitcoiner jobs, go to the Stacker News job space, or just find me on Twitter, and I'm happy to help connect you. There's only 10 people who listen to this podcast, so if 5 of them are looking for jobs, I'm happy to route people to companies looking for Bitcoin developers.
Well, I mean, it's probably 9 shadowy super colders looking for an awesome gig. So
yeah, but 4 of them are gainfully employed and not looking for new work.
Well, they're all gainfully employed. They're just looking for something more interesting to do.
Yeah.
Good people are always busy.
Yeah, for real.
Listen, guys, again, like seriously, thank you so much. This was awesome. I think we should definitely do a few more sort of like panels on this. I want sort of like different voices of the parts that interact with each other. I think that's where the value really is at, because this software is about interactions. I look forward to, your suggestions on like how and where we should explore. You guys know much more about Lightning than I do. So with that, thank you so much. And you guys enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
So happy us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to follow at Bitcoin Review HQ or get in touch on Telegram, Bitcoin Review Pod, or bitcoinreview@coinkite.com. We don't have a crystal ball, so let us know about your projects. Leave your Boostagram on this episode and we'll try to read it on the next episode. If you don't know much about Value for Value or Bitcoin Podcast 2.0, go to bitcoin.review/V4V.